The night Seren Ashwood ran for her life, she did not know she was running toward the one man every living wolf in the known territories feared to face. She only knew the trees, the cold, the blood on her bare feet, and the sound of her own heartbeat screaming at her to keep moving. The Ironveil forest was forbidden ground. Every pack child from here to the eastern ranges was taught that before they learned to shift. You did not cross into Ironveil. You did not hunt in Ironveil's shadow. You did not breathe the air on the wrong side of that ancient border without the blessing of the king who owned every stone of it. But Seren had no choice. 3 hours ago, her Alpha, a man she had never once called anything warmer than Alpha Ren, had sealed a mating contract with Gareth Cole, beta of the Greystone Pack. Not a partnership, not a match, a sale. 40 acres of southern grazing land in exchange for one Omega female who had the unfortunate quality of being young, healthy, and entirely without a family who would protest. Seren had protested herself. That had earned her a locked door and a guard who smelled like old ale and indifference. It had also earned her a split lip when she tried to argue, and a bruised wrist from the chain they'd used to make certain she stayed dressed in the white presentation gown while they finished the negotiations. She had used the chain to break the window latch. Now she ran. The moon was full and merciless overhead, flooding the forest in cold silver light. She had crossed the border marker, a row of black stones carved with the Ironveil crest, without thinking, without breathing, simply because the only other direction was back toward Gareth Cole, and her body had refused to allow that. She was fast for an Omega. She had always been faster than her rank suggested she should be, and she had learned long ago not to question the things about herself that did not fit the categories others tried to force her into. She ran with her arms low, her feet finding the soft earth between exposed roots, her breath controlled despite the terror. She did not hear him until she hit him. It was like running into a wall, except the wall caught her. 2 hands closed around her arms the moment she collided with the solid mass of a chest, spinning her before she could fall, steadying her in a grip that should have frightened her far more than it did. She gasped, vision blurring, and looked up. The man standing in the Ironveil dark was not a guard. He was not a patrol soldier. He was not anyone she had vocabulary for. He was tall in the way that felt like it was part of something ancient, the kind of height that belonged to old bloodlines, to lichen kings painted in war murals. His hair was black against the moonlight, his jaw set in the hard, permanent expression of someone who had not needed to arrange his face for comfort in a very long time. His eyes, when they found her face, were the color of old silver, and in that light they caught the moon the way animal eyes did. He was not Omega. He was not Beta. Every particle of air between them vibrated with the kind of authority that did not need to announce itself. Seren's mouth opened. The mate bond hit her like a wave breaking open. She had read about it. Every unmated female in every pack had heard the stories, the warmth, the pull, the impossible rightness of recognizing the one the moon had made for you. She had believed it the way she believed in things she had never touched, distantly, academically, with mild curiosity. She believed it now. It came from nowhere and everywhere at once, a heat behind her sternum, a sudden clarity, a recognition that bypassed language entirely. Her wolf, the quiet and controlled thing she had spent years learning to keep still, lurched awake inside her chest with an urgency that made her breath catch. His grip tightened slightly. His expression did not change, but his eyes, those cold silver eyes, went very still in the way that eyes do when something behind them is no longer calm.
Who are you?
His voice was low, measured, the kind of voice that did not need volume to be heard in a crowded room. Seren's heart hammered. She pulled against his hands, not because she wanted to run from him, but because she did not know what else to do with the terrifying certainty that she did not want to run from him at all.
Let go of me,
she said. He did not. You are standing in Ironveil territory, he said. without invitation, without pack marker, without clothing appropriate for presentation. A pause. Try again. Who are you? Behind him, she heard footsteps, soldiers materializing from between the trees like shadows given form. 6, 8, 10 men in dark armor, each carrying themselves with the specific stillness of wolves who had learned to suppress their instinct to kneel only because their king was already present. And that was when the understanding arrived, slow and devastating, like cold water poured down the center of her spine. She looked at the crest on the nearest soldier's armor. She looked at the man holding her arms. She looked at the way every living thing in 100 feet of him existed in perfect, unbroken deference. You're the king, she whispered. Something moved in those silver eyes. Not warmth, not welcome. I am, said Caelum Voss, Alpha King of Ironveil, the man no wolf in the known world dared approach, and he had not let go of her arms. And Seren Ashwood, who had been running to save her own life, understood with terrible clarity that she had just run directly into the most dangerous situation she had ever encountered. She still did not want to run. That was the part that frightened her most. Chapter 2. They brought her to the fortress in silence. No chains, no blindfold. She had half expected both, but instead she was given a heavy cloak by a soldier who could not quite meet her eyes, and she was walked between 4 armed guards through the Ironveil trees as though she were a diplomatic problem that required careful handling. Caelum Voss walked ahead of her. He did not look back. The Ironveil fortress rose out of the forest like something the earth had grown rather than built. Black stone walls furred with old moss, towers that caught the moonlight and turned it cold, gates that opened before the king without a sound or signal, because nothing in this place needed permission except the people inside it. Seren's bare feet met cobblestone. She walked with her chin level, her spine straight, the way she had learned to walk every single time she had been made to stand in front of someone with the power to decide her fate. She would not give them a hunched back to remember. They put her in a room on the 2nd level of the east wing. Not a cell, but not guest quarters either. A clean room with a narrow bed, a wooden chair, a window with a view of the inner courtyard, and a door that locked from the outside. A servant arrived within an hour with water, bread, a clean dress, and no explanation. The servant left before Seren could ask a single question. She cleaned the cuts on her feet. She braided her dark hair back from her face. She sat on the edge of the bed and pressed her hands flat against her thighs and breathed. The mate bond hummed at the base of her throat like a second pulse. She pressed her fingers there and felt the warmth of it and told herself it meant nothing. The moon gave bonds freely. The moon was ancient and indifferent and had no understanding of what it meant to be sold, chained, and running through a forbidden forest on a full moon night with blood on your feet and nothing to your name but the dress you had escaped in. The moon's choices had never once been consulted about hers. She would manage this. Caelum stood at the window of his private war room and stared at the courtyard below. The east wing was visible from here. He was not looking at it. He was exercising extreme and deliberate control over the part of him that wanted to look at it. Lord Commander Savan had his arms crossed, which meant he was troubled. Savan had served Caelum for 11 years, had survived 3 campaigns, 2 assassination attempts, and the politics of 7 Alpha Councils, and he expressed disturbance through the specific tension in his forearms. Caelum knew this the way he knew the weight of his sword or the sound of rain on iron veilstone, by long proximity and no warmth. She crossed the northern border marker, Savan said, alone, no pack scent fresh enough to track. She was running east, not west, which means she was not scouting. Whatever she was doing in Ironveil, it was not political. I know, Caelum said. Her status is unclear. She presents Omega, but... I know, Caelum said again. Savan paused. He had learned, over 11 years, to hear the things the king did not say. "The bond?" he asked carefully. The silence in the room was absolute. "You will not speak of that to anyone," Caelum said, and his voice was perfectly even in the way that it became when evenness required effort. "Not to the council, not to the priests, not to your own reflection. Caelum, High Lord Vazarin arrives in 4 days with the treaty delegation from Silver Crest." Caelum turned from the window. His face was stone. "Alpha Queen Mira expects a formal reception and a preliminary mating ceremony within the month. The northern trade routes depend on the Ironveil Silver Crest alliance, and the Silver Crest Pact controls the only mountain passes available for the winter supply lines. You know all of this." "I know all of this," Savan agreed quietly. "Then you also know that what happened in the forest tonight is not a complication I can afford." Savan looked at him for a moment longer than was comfortable. "And the girl?" "She will be returned to her pack in the morning." A pause. "After she has been questioned." Savan nodded once and left. Caelum turned back to the window he was not looking at, and stood there until the courtyard torches burned down to embers. He did not sleep. In the morning, they brought Seren before the king. The great hall of Ironveil Fortress was not designed to comfort visitors. The stone was dark, the ceiling vaulted into shadow, and the long, narrow windows admitted light in strict vertical columns that suggested geometry rather than welcome. The throne at the end of the hall was carved from a single piece of ironwood, black with age, simple in the way that things are simple when they have never needed to prove anything. Caelum sat in it like he had been born there, which, Seren supposed, he had. She stood before him without flinching. She had counted the steps from the door. She had noted the positions of the 4 guards. She had observed that the Lord Commander, standing to the king's right, was watching her with careful professional assessment, and that 2 other men, older, robed in dark council gray, were watching her with something considerably less neutral. "You crossed the northern border of Ironveil territory without invitation or pack escort," Caelum said. His voice was the same as it had been in the forest, low, controlled, carrying absolutely no residue of what had happened between them in the dark. "Your name, your pack, and why you were running." "Seren," she said, "Ashwood pack. And I was running because my Alpha sold me to a man I refused, and I chose a forbidden forest over a forced mating." She watched something pass across the council members' faces. Distaste. The kind of aristocratic discomfort that emerged when something raw and truthful entered a room designed for careful language. Caelum's expression did not shift. Alpha Ren of the Ashwood Pack is within his sovereign rights to arrange mating contracts for unmated Omegas under his protection. "I am aware," Seren said. "I disagreed with his choice of buyer." "You disagreed," one of the council members, a heavy-set man with iron rings on 3 fingers, repeated, as though the word were a kind of affront. "An Omega, disagreeing with her Alpha." Seren looked at him steadily. "It is a verb. It is available to everyone." A muscle moved in Caelum's jaw. Just one, just briefly. "You will be escorted back to the Ashwood border by midday," he said. "Your Alpha will be notified of your trespass. Any consequences arising from your return are a matter between you and your pack." The room was quiet. Seren stood very still. She thought about the locked door, the chain, Gareth Cole's hands. She thought about the way her wolf had lurched awake in the forest, and the way the king's silver eyes had gone still. She thought about the fact that sending her back to the Ashwood pack was exactly the same as sending her back to the cage she had broken open with a length of chain. She said nothing, because there was nothing to say to a king who had already decided. She turned, very precisely, and walked toward the door. The mate bond pulled at her chest like a hook in deep water, patient, relentless, telling her something the man on the throne was clearly committed to ignoring. She had learned, over a lifetime of being underestimated, to be patient too. Chapter 3. She did not make it back to the Ashwood border by midday. The escort was ready. The horses were saddled. 3 soldiers stood in the inner courtyard with the kind of posture that meant they had been briefed on efficiency rather than kindness. Seren had braided her hair, straightened the borrowed dress, and walked into the courtyard with the composed expression of someone who had decided to treat this as a beginning rather than an ending. Then Lord Commander Savan appeared at the fortress door and spoke 2 words to the lead escort, and the horses were unsaddled again. He did not explain why. Seren was returned to the east wing room. The door locked. She sat on the wooden chair by the window and watched the courtyard with narrowed eyes and thought, something changed. She just did not know what. What had changed was a name. Savan had run it because he was thorough, and because thoroughness had kept him alive when cleverness would have gotten him killed. He had recorded the girl's name, Seren Ashwood, in the standard trespass notation, and sent a routine inquiry to the Eastern Records Office, expecting a 1-line return. Female, Omega designation, Ashwood pack affiliation, unmated. What he received instead was a notation he had to read 3 times before he believed it. He had gone directly to Caelum. The king now stood in the records room, a narrow, cold chamber behind the main library, stacked floor to ceiling with sealed documentation, holding a document that was older than either of them, and reading it with the focused stillness of a man who had been surprised and did not intend to show it. The Ashwood line, Savan said quietly, not the pack, the bloodline itself. It predates the pack by 4 generations. It traces back to the Vial dynasty. The Vial dynasty. Caelum set the document down with precise care. The Vale line was declared extinct 7 decades ago, officially recorded by 3 separate Alpha councils. Officially recorded, Savan agreed, but there is a discrepancy in the Ironveil ancestral archives that this council has apparently been aware of for some time. A younger branch of the Vial bloodline survived the purge of the last Vial king. They were relocated, their designation suppressed, their records sealed. He paused. They were given the Ashwood name and resettled in the eastern border packs as Omega-presenting wolves. Seren was not an Omega. The Omega designation had been imposed, a suppression ritual performed on Vial descendants at birth, an ancient, brutal piece of political medicine designed to prevent bloodline activation, to keep ancient Lycan royal blood dormant, invisible, manageable. The suppression is maintained by the pack Alpha, Caelum said. It was not a question. He was reading the document again, and his jaw had a familiar tension that Savan recognized as restrained fury. Maintained and renewed at each significant life transition. First shift, coming of age, forced mating arrangement. Savan let that land deliberately. If she had been mated to Gareth Cole, the ritual binding would have been performed at the ceremony. The suppression would have been permanent. The fury was no longer entirely restrained. Alpha Ren knew, Caelum said. Almost certainly. The Ashwood pack has been receiving financial compensation from the council for 3 generations. There are payment records, small amounts, regular enough to look like agricultural subsidies, significant enough, in total, to constitute a controlled silence. Caelum was quiet for a long moment. The council had known. Multiple high lords had known. They had kept an ancient bloodline suppressed, hidden in a border pack, and they had allowed, or arranged, that bloodline's last female heir to be sold into a mating that would have buried it permanently. There were only 2 reasons to bury a bloodline that completely. Either it posed a threat to the current structure of power, or it posed a threat to a specific alliance. His eyes moved, without his full permission, toward the window. The east wing was visible from here. No one explained anything to Seren. She was not given reasons. She was given a second day in the east wing room, better food, and a servant who answered her direct questions with a specific category of professional vagueness that told her nothing while implying everything was complicated. On the second evening, she found the window unlatched. She was not certain if it was an accident or an invitation. She studied it for a long time, then latched it herself and sat back down. Running again would tell her nothing. Running again would simply confirm to everyone in this fortress that she was a problem to be managed rather than a person to be dealt with. She was tired of being managed. On the third morning, the king came himself. He did not arrive with guards. He arrived alone, unlocking the door with his own key, stepping into the room with the careful economy of someone entering a space they were not certain they had the right to occupy. He was in plain clothes, dark, simple, no crown, no armor. It made him look, in some impossible way, even more dangerous. Seren stood. She watched him cross toward the wooden chair and remain standing beside it, which told her the conversation was going to be honest, or he would have sat in the position of authority. "There are things you need to know about yourself," he said, "that no one in your pack has ever told you." She had always known something was different about her. All her life she had been different, faster than Omegas were supposed to be, stronger under stress than the designation should allow, and her wolf had never once submitted the way Omega wolves did. She had spent years interpreting these things as defects rather than truths. She crossed her arms. "Tell me." He did. She listened without interrupting. Her face was still. Her hands were absolutely steady. She had long practice in receiving devastating information and processing it where no one could see. When he finished, the silence in the room was very large. "So, I am not what they told me I was," she said. "You are not. And the suppression ritual, my wolf, my designation, my entire understanding of what I am, was done to me, without my knowledge, without my consent, from birth. Yes." She turned and looked at the window for a moment. The courtyard below, the sky beyond. "And you," she said carefully, "are telling me this now, 3 days after you decided to send me back to the pack that did this to me." He said nothing, which was answer enough. She turned back to him. Her eyes were steady and dark, and there was something in them that had nothing to do with the mate bond, something older and colder that had been living in her long before she had ever heard his name. "What do you want from me?" she asked, "in exchange for this truth? What does the King of Ironveil need from the last heir of a bloodline his council has been paying to keep buried?" Something moved across his face. It was not comfortable. It was not the expression of a man who had an answer he was proud of. "Nothing," he said. "I want nothing from you." She looked at him for a long time. She did not believe him, but she was beginning to understand that he was not entirely lying either. That was, in its own way, the most frightening thing he had said. Chapter 4. Alpha Queen. Mira of Silver Crest arrived with 40 riders and a delegation dressed in white and pale gold. She was beautiful in the way that things built, for purpose are beautiful, precise, polished, architected. Her silver blonde hair was braided back from a face that wore composure the way armor is worn, deliberately, with knowledge of what it protects. She carried herself through the Ironveil gates with the confidence of a woman who had negotiated her own worth long before she had arrived to negotiate a treaty. Seren watched the procession from the east wing window. She had been moved that morning to a smaller room on the ground floor of the same wing, still not a cell, still not a guest chamber, but a narrower space that communicated with architectural precision that she had been arranged into a lower position. She understood what was happening. She simply did not yet know how far it would go. The formal court assembly was held in the great hall at evening, and Seren was brought to it. Not invited. Brought. 2 guards appeared at her door with the neutral expressions of people executing instructions they had not written and did not intend to explain. She was given a clean dress, presentable but plain, the kind of garment that communicated status the way a number communicates rank. She was walked to the hall and placed at the side of the assembly, neither inside the inner court nor outside it, but in the specific ambiguous position reserved for things that were politically inconvenient to categorize clearly. The hall was full. High lords, pack representatives, senior wolves from 6 different territories who had come for the treaty reception. Silvercrest's delegation stood in their pale gold with the formal stillness of a court that had dressed for an audience. Alpha Queen Mira sat in the guest chair to the right of the throne. Caelum sat in the throne itself. He looked at the assembly with the expression Seren had already learned to read as his public face: absolute control, total authority, zero information about what was happening beneath it. Lord Gavrin, the council member with the iron rings, rose to address the assembly with the particular verbal formality of someone who considered elaborate sentences a form of power. "In the matter of the border trespass registered 3 days past," he said, "the individual apprehended in the northern forest of Ironveil, one Seren of the Ashwood pack, has been held pending determination of appropriate remedy. As the Ashwood pack has been formally notified and Alpha Wren has requested her return, His Majesty will see that she is escorted to the border at the conclusion of this assembly." He sat back down. And that was all. That was the entirety of it. A sentence delivered in a crowded hall, reducing her to an administrative notation, confirming that she would be handed back to the man who had sold her, in front of 40 representatives from the most powerful packs in the known territories, with her standing against the wall in a plain dress, while the woman already positioned to be the next Queen of Ironveil sat 12 feet away. Seren's hands were flat at her sides. She looked at Caelum. He was not looking at her. His gaze moved over the assembly with the measured attention of a king conducting a reception, and he wore the expression of someone who had made a decision in a cold room and was committed to it. She understood. She had known something like this was coming. She had felt the shape of it forming over the last 3 days, in the careful management of information, in the smaller room, in the way he had told her about her bloodline as though it were a private debt rather than a political statement. He had given her a truth he could not afford to have the council discover, and in return he had decided to send her back before it became a conflict he could not contain. She was a complication he was choosing to remove. The mate bond in her chest was steady and warm, and absolutely indifferent to the decision being made on her behalf, which was the cruelest thing about it. She waited until Lord Gavrin had moved on to the next item of business. Then she stepped forward, out of her position at the side wall, into the open space of the great hall. A silence arrived. It spread from her outward the way cold spreads from an open window. Immediately, unmistakably, impossible to contain. Every eye in the room found her, including Caelum's. His expression locked. She looked at him across the length of the great hall, and she said, clearly and calmly, in the voice of someone who had nothing left to perform, "I want you to know that I understand exactly what you are doing, and I want you to know that I am not going back to the Ashwood pack. Not today. Not because of a king's administrative decision made while I stand against a wall." The silence deepened. "I have been called a prisoner when I have not been jailed. I have been called a trespasser when I was fleeing a crime committed against me by my own pack. I have been informed of truths about my own blood, my own body, and my own identity, and then scheduled to be returned to the people who committed those crimes against me, in front of a hall full of witnesses, as though I were a document to be filed." She paused. "I am not a document." Something moved in the great hall that was not wind. 40 wolves of varying rank felt the pressure of a voice that was not using volume, and were reassessing, very quickly, what they had assumed about the woman against the wall. Caelum had not moved. Alpha Queen Mira had tilted her head slightly, with the expression of a woman observing something unexpected and recalibrating in real time. "You made a choice," Seren said, and she said it only to him now, because there was no longer any point in saying it to the room. "You are allowed to make it. You are the king. You have your treaty and your trade routes and your winter supply lines, and the very reasonable political necessity of an alliance that has nothing to do with a girl who ran into your forest by accident. A pause. Make the choice freely, but do not make it while standing behind protocol, as though the protocol is what decides and you are simply its instrument. No one breathed. Caelum's jaw was tight. His silver eyes were locked on her, and they were no longer cold. They were something else, something under tremendous pressure, something that did not have a clean name. She held his gaze for 3 seconds. Then she turned, walked to the door of the great hall, and pushed it open herself without waiting for a guard to do it. Behind her, the great hall of Ironveil Fortress remained perfectly, catastrophically silent. She did not run. She had learned how to leave without running. She walked through the east wing to the smaller room they had moved her to, and she took nothing from it except the cloak hanging by the door. Then she walked to the stables, and she told the stable boy that the king had ordered a horse saddled for the morning. She was going to the border before dawn, and this time she was not going east. Chapter 5. The western border of Ironveil was 3 hours by horse through open forest, and Seren rode the first hour in silence, watching the dark trees give way to the pale gray of pre-dawn, feeling the mate bond stretch and pull behind her, like a thread being drawn tighter with every mile. She did not slow down. The bond was real. She was not denying that. It was as real as the bruise still yellowing on her wrist, as real as the knowledge of what had been done to her from birth, as real as the memory of standing in a hall full of wolves while a king arranged her return to her jailer. The bond was not the question. The bond had never been the question. The question was whether she was willing to be kept by something she had not chosen, whether a pull in her chest was the same as consent, whether being someone's fated mate meant belonging to them before they had done a single thing to deserve belonging. She had answered that question in the Great Hall. She intended to keep answering it. The Thornfield border scouts found her at dawn, which she had anticipated. Thornfield territory began where Ironveil's western reach ended, a wide belt of highland forest that had been neutral ground for 3 generations, maintained that way through the deliberate political philosophy of its alpha, a man named Dre Kellen, who had made his reputation not through war, but through the specific and calculated practice of being useful to people other alphas had discarded. Wolves without packs came to Thornfield, contested heirs, wolves whose bloodlines were politically inconvenient. Those who had escaped arranged mates. Kellen gave them sanctuary, gave them correct designation, gave them work and land and protection, and collected over time a pack made entirely of people who owed their lives to his willingness to say yes when every other power said return. Seren had heard of him the way you hear of things that might one day save your life, with cautious, practical attention. The scouts brought her to a way station just inside the Thornfield line, a large stone building set in a highland clearing, warm with torchlight and the smell of wood smoke. She was given hot food and a seat, and she ate with the focused steadiness of someone who had not let themselves be hungry in front of others in a very long time. Alpha Dre Kellen arrived within the hour. He was younger than she had expected, mid-30s, dark-eyed, built with the economical precision of someone who had been in many rooms where he needed to be the most capable person present, and had prepared accordingly. He sat across from her with his elbows on the table, and no performance of authority anywhere in his bearing, which was itself a form of authority. "Seren Ashwood," he said. It was not a question. "I have been waiting for that name for about 4 years." She set down her cup. "Why? Because I have a copy of the Vale lineage records that the Ironveil Council believed were sealed." He watched her face. "And because I have been monitoring the Ashwood Pack payments for 2 years. I knew eventually whoever remained of that bloodline was going to need somewhere to land." A pause. "I did not expect you to arrive on horseback before sunrise." "Circumstances," she said. "I heard." He nodded slowly. Alpha Ren has been circulating a notification of your escape from a contracted arrangement. Gareth Cole filed a formal complaint with the Eastern Council this morning. You are currently classified as a fugitive from a valid mating contract. She absorbed this without expression. And the Ironveil notation? Ironveil's official record states you were released after questioning. No charges filed. No escort provided. A pause. Which means he let you leave on your own and then officially made it someone else's problem. The mate bond ached. She pressed her hand flat on the table and left it there. I need sanctuary, she said. Formal Thornfield sanctuary. I need my designation reviewed and my bloodline formally recorded. I need the suppression ritual documented as the coercive procedure it was, and I need it on record with a recognized Alpha authority before the Eastern Council has time to process Cole's complaint. Kellen studied her for a moment. You are not asking me to hide you, he said. No, I am asking you to see me. There is a difference. Something in his expression shifted, not softness, but recognition. The particular look of someone seeing competence in a context where they had not quite expected it. I can do that, he said. The process takes... He stopped. The wolves outside the way station had gone very still. Seren felt it before she heard it. A pressure in the air, the specific weight of an approaching alpha so deeply rooted in authority that the ambient energy of every lesser wolf within a mile radius bent toward him the way trees bend in advance of a storm. She closed her eyes for a single second. Then she opened them and said, very calmly, He is here. Caelum had ridden through the night. He had not slept. He had not sent scouts ahead. He had not drafted a political communique or consulted Lord Savan or given any thought whatsoever to the treaty currently in residence back at his fortress, or the Alpha Queen, who would wake in the guest chambers to find the king absent. He had felt the mate bond pulling west and thinning with distance like a cord being cut strand by strand, and he had done what he had spent 7 years learning never to do. He had reacted. He arrived at the Thornfield way station with 4 soldiers, none of whom he had told anything except ride west and keep up. He dismounted in the clearing outside the building and studied the Thornfield scouts positioned at the door, with the expression of a man who had already calculated that forcing entry into a neutral way station would constitute a formal breach of the Thornfield Sanctuary Protocol. He did not force entry. He walked to the door and knocked, which was, for the King of Ironveil, an act so procedurally foreign that his own soldiers exchanged glances behind him. The door opened. Alpha Kellen stood in the frame. The 2 men looked at each other. They had met twice before, at a Northern Trade Summit and at a border mediation that had involved a great deal of polite diplomatic language and an undercurrent of mutual assessment that had never quite resolved into either alliance or animosity. Caelum, Kellen said. His voice was neutral, which was worse than hostile. I need to speak with the woman you are sheltering, Caelum said. She is here under Thornfield Sanctuary Protocol. I know the protocol, Caelum said. I am asking her permission to speak with her, not yours. A pause. Kellen stepped aside. She was standing in the center of the room when he entered. She had not positioned herself at the back wall in a defensive posture. She was simply standing in the open space of the stone floor, arms at her sides, watching him come through the door, with the expression of someone who had already rehearsed this. Kellen remained near the entrance. His presence was a statement. I am here. I am watching. She is not alone. Caelum looked at her. The mate bond in his chest was no longer a quiet pressure. It was the loudest thing in the room. I came, he said. I can see that, she said. I made a mistake. He stopped himself before the easier words arrived. In the hall, before the hall, the first morning, every morning since. He held her gaze. I knew what the bond was the moment it happened. I have known for 3 days, and I chose, every single day, in every single decision, to manage the situation instead of facing it, because facing it meant losing something I had built with enormous cost, and I did not believe that what I would lose was worth less than what I might gain. Seren said nothing. He kept going, because he had ridden through the night and come to the border of a neutral territory and knocked on a door, and there was no version of this where he stopped halfway. I was wrong, he said, not strategically, morally, in the part of being wrong that has nothing to do with strategy. She looked at him for a long time. You rode here, she said slowly, in the middle of the night, with a treaty guest in your castle and an Alpha Queen waiting for a preliminary mating ceremony, and you knocked on a door in a neutral way station to tell me you were wrong. Yes. And what do you expect me to do with that? He said nothing, because that was the honest answer. He did not know. He had ridden through the night to give her the truth, and he had arrived at the border of her freedom, and he did not, for once in his life, have a strategy for what came after. Caelum, near the door, had the expression of a man deeply and professionally interested in how this would end. And Seren Ashwood, last heir of the Veil bloodline, who had been sold and suppressed and managed and scheduled for return, looked at the king of the most powerful territory in the known world, standing in the doorway of a way station with no plan and no performance, and nothing left but the admission of what he had done. And she said, Go back to your fortress, Caelum. I am not finished here. Chapter 6. Caelum went back, not only because she had dismissed him. He went back because standing in the Thornfield way station at dawn, having ridden through the night to tell a woman he had wronged that he had been wrong, he had finally understood the full geometry of the mistake he had been making. He had been trying to manage the outcome of something that required an entirely different kind of courage. He returned to the Ironveil fortress in the early morning light, riding ahead of his escort, his face set with the specific expression that Lord Savin, waiting in the courtyard, would later describe to no one, but would privately classify as the look of a man who has finished one war and decided to start another, the kind he intended to win differently. Alpha Queen Mira was in the breakfast chamber when he arrived. She was composed, unsurprised, and, Caelum thought with belated recognition, aware of considerably more than she had been given credit for. He sat across from her. He told her the truth, the full truth, the mate bond, the vile bloodline, the 3 days of choosing protocol over honesty, the night ride west. He told it in plain language, without diplomatic framing, because she deserved the real version, and because there was no longer any form of the decorative version that served anyone. When he finished, Mira was quiet for a moment. I wondered, she said, why there was a woman in the East Wing, and you had the look of someone carrying something you had not yet put down. He said nothing. I am not in love with you, she said. I want to be clear about that, because I think you already know it, but it seems important to say plainly. This treaty marriage was constructed to solve a political problem, and we have both been walking toward it with the energy of two people fulfilling an obligation they cannot find a reason to refuse. She paused. I would like to find a reason. I would prefer one that does not require anyone to be dishonest about something as permanent as a mate bond. The trade routes, he said, can be negotiated separately. The mountain passes are mine to grant or withhold, regardless of my mating status. My council knows this. Your council has been hoping I did not. She looked at him directly. Dissolve the preliminary agreement, renegotiate the treaty on its own terms, and then deal with the rest of what you have made. He was quiet for a moment. You are, he said carefully, considerably easier to respect than I anticipated. Most people are, she said, when no one is trying to sell them. The formal assembly was called for midday. The hall was full. The Silvercrest delegation, the Ironveil court, the high lords and pack representatives who had witnessed Seren's exit 2 days before, and had been constructing their own interpretations of it ever since. The air had the charged quality of a room that knew something significant was about to happen and was deciding in advance whether to approve. Caelum entered without ceremony. He stood before the throne rather than in it, which was a deliberate signal that Lord Seren clocked immediately and that the council members received with the narrowed expressions of people rapidly recalculating. The treaty between Ironveil and Silver Crest regarding trade and mountain pass access will be renegotiated as a standalone political agreement, he said without preamble, independent of any mating arrangement. Alpha Queen Mira has agreed to this structure. The preliminary mating agreement is dissolved. Lord Gavin was on his feet before the sentence was finished. Your Majesty, the financial implications alone. I am also formally acknowledging a matter that this council has suppressed for 3 generations, Caelum continued, as though the man had not spoken. Payment records from the Ironveil Treasury indicate that multiple members of the High Council have been funding the suppression and concealment of the Vial bloodline, specifically the deliberate Omega designation of bloodline heirs through coercive ritual, performed without their knowledge or consent in exchange for their political invisibility. He let that settle. Those records will be submitted to the full Northern Council for review. All involved members are suspended from this court pending that review. Lord Gavrin, Lord Tace, Lord Aldrich. The silence in the hall was the kind that does not dissipate. It simply deepens. Gavrin's face had gone the color of old ash. Caelum looked at him with the eyes of someone who had been angry for 48 hours in the cold and focused way, and was now expressing the end result. The Vial bloodline did not die, he said to the hall, to the record, to the document that Seren was already having prepared in the records chamber. It was hidden. The last heir of that line is Seren Ashwood, whose true designation is not Omega, whose identity was suppressed by this court's deliberate financial arrangement, and whose status as a trespasser on Ironveil land was a direct result of her fleeing a forced mating designed to make that suppression permanent. He paused. She is not a prisoner. She has never been a prisoner. She is under formal Thornfield Sanctuary as of this morning, and she is owed, at minimum, the truth about what she is. He turned to Savan. Send a formal escort to the Thornfield way station, not a summons, an invitation, full political protection, her choice. Savan nodded once. She came back 3 days later, not immediately, not the same day. She had things to do in the Thornfield way station that had nothing to do with him. Documentation to witness, records to file, a formal meeting with Alpha Kellen that resulted in a signed acknowledgement of her bloodline by a recognized Alpha authority, which she folded and kept in the inside pocket of her cloak, because it was the first official piece of paper in her life that bore her real name. When the Ironveil escort arrived on the second morning, she thanked them, told them she would need 1 more day, and watched the lead soldier, a woman, broad-shouldered, with the patient expression of someone who had been briefed for exactly this response, simply nod and say, "Take what you need." She rode in on the 3rd morning, not through the forest. Through the main gate, in full view of the inner courtyard, on the horse they had saddled for her, with the Ironveil escort behind her, and the Thornfield pack mark temporarily registered to her status in the official record until she chose otherwise. Caelum was in the courtyard, not with ceremony, not with the court assembled, just him, and Seren at a respectful distance, and the ordinary morning activity of a fortress going about its day. She dismounted and stood in front of him, and the mate bond between them was warm and patient and present, the way it always was, indifferent to protocol, indifferent to politics, waiting. She looked at him. "You dissolved the treaty," she said. "Yes." "You suspended 3 council members." "Yes." "You sent the bloodline records to the Northern Council." "Yesterday morning." She studied him. He looked, she thought, like a man who had not slept in 3 days, not from crisis management, but from the specific exhaustion of someone who had been sitting with themselves for an extended period of time and not entirely enjoying the company. "Why?" she said. He blinked. Why what? Why any of it? She said it simply, without accusation. You had the treaty, you had the alliance, you had the political structure you had spent years building. Dissolving it does not benefit Ironveil strategically. Exposing the council creates internal instability. And formally acknowledging a bloodline your own archives have been suppressing for 3 generations will create legal complications that take years to resolve. She paused. Why? He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, because none of it was worth the cost. The courtyard was ordinary around them. Stable sounds, wood smoke, the flat morning light of a day going about its business. I spent 7 years ruling this territory, making every decision in the interest of the institution, he said. Every choice calibrated to stability, to legacy, to what the pack needed from a king who had already lost too much to risk losing anything else. And I was good at it, and it was empty, and I had learned to call the emptiness discipline. He held her gaze. And then you ran into me in the dark. She said nothing. I knew, he said. I knew from the first second. My wolf recognized you in the same moment my hands closed around your arms, and I spent 3 days choosing protocol over that knowledge because I was afraid of what it would cost me. His voice was steady, but there was something under it that was not. I should not have made you stand in that hall. I should not have let Gavrin reduce you to a notation. I should not have let you walk out of here with nowhere safe to go except a border way station and the goodwill of a man I barely know. A pause. I am not telling you this because I want something in return. I am telling you what happened and taking the full weight of it, because you are owed that, and because I am not willing to go back to being the man who called the emptiness discipline. The mate bond in her chest was warm and steady and waiting. She looked at him for a long time. She thought about the chain on the window latch. She thought about the great hall and the plain dress and the sensation of being rendered into a sentence. She thought about 3 days in a way station with a man who showed her records and offered sanctuary without asking for anything. And she thought about the fact that she had refused to move until the paperwork was done, until her name was on a document by her own authority, in her own hand. She thought about the fact that she had chosen to come back. You understand, she said carefully, that this is not a return to the position I left. I am not the East Wing Room. I am not an administrative notation. I am not a border prisoner, or a diplomatic complication, or a mate bond you are managing. She let that settle. If I stay in Ironveil, I stay as what I am, Seren Ashwood of the Vial line. My designation recorded correctly, my bloodline formally acknowledged. My presence here my own choice, not a result of a bond I did not ask for, or a political calculation I was not included in. Yes, he said, you say that very easily. I have had 3 days to stop saying the easy wrong things, he said. I am attempting the harder right ones. Something moved in her chest, not the bond, but something beneath it, something quieter and older and more specifically hers. She had been underestimated her whole life. She had been classified, suppressed, sold, and scheduled. She had been told what she was and what she deserved and what she was allowed to want. She had carried it in the careful, controlled stillness of someone who has learned that the world will label your survival as compliance and your resistance as defiance, and that neither label belongs to you. She had run through a forbidden forest in a white presentation gown with blood on her feet and crashed into a king who caught her and then spent 3 days trying to file her correctly. She had stood in his great hall and told the truth in front of 40 witnesses. She had ridden to a border without knowing what was waiting on the other side. She had waited 3 days and done the paperwork. She had chosen to come back. That was hers. All of it. He had not given it to her. She had built it in the dark, one step at a time, the way she had always built everything. She looked at Caelum Voss, King of Ironveil, standing in an ordinary courtyard in the morning light, with the expression of a man who has arrived at the edge of something and does not know yet whether he is welcome. And she thought, he fell. He genuinely fell. And it cost him things he valued, and he paid the price without being asked. And he is standing here himself instead of sending a delegation, because he finally understood that she was not a situation to be delegated. It was not everything. It was a beginning. But it was a real one. "I know where the East Wing room is," she said. "I also know where the records chamber is, the training yard, the stables, and the border maps. I will learn the rest." A pause. "Do not manage me." "I will not," he said. She held his gaze a moment longer. Then she walked past him, not into his arms, but into the fortress, through the gate, into the space she had chosen to make hers. And the mate bond moved with her like something finally uncoiled, settled, at rest. He stood in the courtyard and watched her go. And Seren, at his respectful distance, observed the expression on the king's face. Not triumph, not relief, but something quieter and far more durable. And said nothing at all, because some things require no commentary. In the weeks that followed, the Northern Council reviewed the bloodline records, the payment histories, and the suppression documentation. 3 council members were formally removed from their positions. Alpha Ren of the Ashwood Pack was summoned to answer for his role in the coercive designation rituals performed on his own pack members. Gareth Cole's mating contract was declared void, not by petition, but by the formal determination that it had been drafted against the consent and correct status of a misclassified heir, which made it retroactively and irrevocably nothing at all. The trade agreement between Ironveil and Silvercrest was renegotiated over 2 weeks of focused and honest conversation. It was signed without a mating clause and became one of the more durable alliances in the Northern Territory's recent history, largely because it had been built on actual terms rather than the residue of 2 people fulfilling an obligation neither had agreed to honestly. Mira, departing, paused at the gate and looked back at Seren standing in the courtyard. In riding clothes now, with the Veil bloodline mark formally registered in the Ironveil record, with the straight spine and leveled gaze of someone who had learned to walk through spaces not designed for her, and had decided to become someone who redesigned them. "You are going to be an extraordinary political force," Mira said. "I know," said Seren. Mira laughed, genuinely, unexpectedly, and rode out. On the night of the first full moon after Seren's return to Ironveil, Caelum found her in the northern forest. Not by tracking. The bond had simply led him to where she was, standing in the silver light between the old trees, near the place where she had run into him in the dark, her bare feet on the cold earth and her face tilted toward the moon. He stood at the edge of the trees and waited. She heard him. She turned. "I come here sometimes," she said, "when I need to remember what it felt like to run." He crossed the space between them. He stood close enough that the bond was a warmth between them, shared and steady, no longer contested. "Do you miss it?" he asked. "The running." She considered it honestly. "No," she said. "I miss the version of it where I did not know where I was going. There was something very clean about that." She looked up at him. "I know where I am now." He reached out and tucked a strand of dark hair back from her face, slowly, with the particular carefulness of someone learning a new kind of touch, one that asked rather than assumed. She let him. The moon was full overhead, flooding the forest in cold silver, indifferent to everything below it except the ancient business of illuminating what had always been there. "I was wrong about so many things," he said quietly. "But I was not wrong about this." She looked at him. "I know," she said. She had chosen this. She would choose it again tomorrow, and the day after, and every day on which the choice was hers to make. Not because the moon had decided, not because a bond had pulled her, because she had walked back into this space with her name correctly written, her bloodline acknowledged, her history documented, and her feet on ground she had claimed for herself, and the most powerful Alpha King in the known territories had knocked on a door and waited. She had decided that was enough to begin. The forest held them both in its silver quiet, and the mate bond between them was not a chain or a current or a pull anymore. It was simply the warmth of two people standing in the same place. For the first time in a very long time, neither one of them was running. If you enjoyed this story and want more, you can join the channel as a member. Members get early access to new stories, exclusive videos, and a closer place inside our little supernatural romance world. Your support helps me keep creating long, emotional werewolf romance stories like this one. Join the pack right now, and I'll see you in the next story.